Hello, my name is John Mark Shaw, and I'm here to talk to you today about sacrificing our stories for the greater good of the life that we would love living. So many of us have stories which are really meaning that we have made about the experiences that we've had in our lives. And oftentimes the meaning that we make about some of our especially childhood or early experiences can be very limiting to us. And what happens is that meaning that we make, that story that we tell, gets wired and fired in our nervous system, in our brain, and wired into our subconscious mind. And it creates a pattern of belief, which leads to a repetitive pattern of thoughts, feelings, and actions, which create a result that ultimately makes the story true. It's like a thermostatic setting on our results. So I want to give you an example of a story that I had for my entire life, actually. So my parents got divorced, and they are very loving people that I'm still very close to, and I'm blessed to have them both alive in their early 80s. But when I was 7 years old, they got divorced, and over time, that was a childhood challenge and trauma that created some stories for me about the way the world works. And over time, I looked to get to the bottom of those stories and see how those stories might have been limiting me. One of the stories that I realized very recently after working through my relationship with that divorce and that experience and retelling the story many times. So the first version of the story was, from now on I'll never let things fall apart again, meaning it was somehow my fault that this divorce happened, and so my response would be to have a decision that from now on I'll never let things fall apart again, because that was a falling apart that was so painful. So that resulted in my being very controlling in my life, very protective, self-protective of my feelings. It resulted in my not taking as many risks in my career, not taking as many risks in love. Later on in life, when I finally saw that the divorce was, rather than a falling apart, it was actually a cracking open, it was a liberation, so that my mother, my father, and I could fulfill our destiny and live our best lives, that the container of the divorce was not a big enough container for the life that we all wanted to be loved, that we all wanted to be living. And so that was healing for me. But I was still holding on to one story. That story was the idea of broken trust. The idea that somehow being a child who experienced divorce, or anybody who experienced any kind of loss or trauma or abandonment of any kind when they were children, that somehow that was like a feeling of being evicted from the Garden of Eden. And that created a loss of trust in life, in the universe, in God. That somehow this experience created some broken trust. Broken trust that life was here to support me, was a loving partner with me, providing me with a journey of personal development, of self-discovery, and ultimately of liberation, of power, and of joy, and of growth. And as I have lived into being a teacher of principles of successful living, and an interfaith minister, and a life coach, and an executive coach, and a business consultant, and a professional speaker, much of the root of all of that teaching that I do relies on my trusting life, trusting God, trusting self, believing and having faith that there are principles and laws of the way the universe works, and that if we apply those principles, we can generate a life that we love, and that we have with us a loving companionship with Spirit, with the source of all life, the power that breathes us. But if I have a broken trust in that life, in God within us, in the still small voice, in the power that breathes us, then that will mute my aliveness and also mute my success as somebody who is here on the planet to inspire others to have their belief, to have faith, to have trust. And so this past weekend, we had a birthday party for my wife, and my parents, who are in their 80s and have been divorced for many years, for 46 years or so, both showed up at our house, as they always do for all of our events. And they were playing in the room with my daughter, and who they always show up for. So they showed up for me, always, my whole life. They showed up for my daughter. They showed up for my wife, bless them. And what I saw was that they've always shown up for me. And that the story that I told about the divorce and the broken trust was not true. That I could trust in my parents to always be there for me. I could trust in life. I could trust God. I could trust this journey of life, this collaboration, that the power that breathes me is giving me everything I need to fulfill my destiny if I can just see it and find it and feel it and believe, and that it will be done unto me as I believe. And the more faith I have in this power of life, of God, of Spirit, of the Source, the more belief I have in my own power, the more I will succeed, the more I will be able to serve more and more people into their greatness. And so I became willing to sacrifice my story of broken trust that had limited me for 53 years. So I want to close this video by asking you, what story might you be willing to sacrifice for the greater good of the life that you would love living? Is there a limiting story about a childhood experience, a loss, a trauma, something that happened to you in your life that perhaps now, after all these years, you see it's time to release it, to sacrifice it, to forgive it? Forgiveness is a shift in perception that allows me to experience a greater flow of abundance and aliveness. So are you willing to sacrifice your story today? Thank you so much for watching. If you'd love to learn more about me, please visit me at johnmarkshaw.com. Have a beautiful, blessed day.